Thank you very much, Mel. I think the first issue about ageing is the fact that I'm not quite sure whether I have my glasses on the top of my head or I put them like this, but I'm going to keep them on the top of my head. Thank you very much to the CSP for inviting me to talk. And what I'm really looking to do is to take the next 20-25 minutes or so just to explore not what you can do if you work in an older person's service, but what you can do if you work with older people, which are two very different things. So we're going to really look and think about where the physio of today sees older people, in what settings. And if you see them in a particular, shall we say, non-older person specific setting, do you think about the wider impacts of what could be going on with that older person in front of you? And when you do, how do you think about the impact of aging with that person in front of you? And particularly, I'm going to talk about how you might start, only really to start to think about addressing issues such as falls, frailty, or sarcopenia. So, where do you work? You might work in MSK. How much of your patient population is over the age of 60? And the World Health Organization does recognize 60 plus as an older person. And let's just be honest, that will be me next year. Do I think of myself as being an older person? No. But if I'm in healthcare, probably the person seeing me should begin to think that way. What about if you work in an acute setting? Surgery, orthopedics. Lots of orthopedics is with older people. I often think if you work in an orthopedic ward, the patients have either fallen and fractured their hip or they've come off a motorbike. Or certainly that was the case last time I worked in orthopedics, which was quite a while ago. But you see the range of areas there. And I was at the British Geriatric Society conference in Scotland last Friday, and they made exactly the same point. I felt, have they seen my slides? But unless you work in maternity services or paediatrics, you are going to come across older people. And that's very true even if you work in services that traditionally you may not have come across older people. You see, I've got learning disabilities up there, where you might have traditionally thought that the client group was a little bit younger. No, not anymore. So, they've obviously put my slides in a different order. I was going to click through all of those. I thought they hadn't put the clicker up. There we go. So we're going to look and have a think about what aging means. So I'm going to take you back 41 years. So 41 years ago, I got out of the train station at Manchester Oxford Road. I walked down Oxford Road to Manchester Royal Infirmary, and I sat in the School of Physiotherapy, and I was interviewed by Pat Waddington for a place at Manchester Royal Infirmary School of Physiotherapy. Well, I got that place, and that was the start of my physiotherapy journey. Coming back to Manchester, and I have been back in the interim, but coming back to Manchester, Manchester does not seem to have aged. In fact, I think Manchester is getting younger. All of these new buildings coming up. So Manchester is 41 years older, hasn't really aged. I am 41 years older, and sadly, but true, I have aged. But if you look at the facts and figures, aging impacts every single one of you in the audience today. So just to sort of start off with a depressing note, really, I think, but peak bone mineral density is reached at the age of 18 to 20. And I think that number is going down over the years. I was quite surprised when I was looking up the figures for today's talk. Your peak muscle mass is reached at about the age of 30 to 35. The peak of your brain power is about 22. So why have they got me standing here when I'm not at the peak of my brain power? And your VO2 max is a maximum at the age of 20s. So almost if you're working with anybody over a teenager, you are going to have to think about where they are in the aging process. And then when you get to the point of being 60, 65, 70, I think old is always at least 20 years older than you personally actually are, then you really do need to think about the impact of age with the person in front of you. So I'm going to introduce you to the snappily titled Mrs. A, who presents in some sort of physiotherapy service with a sore knee. You, as a physio, examine her knee, you diagnose early OA, you give her knee exercises, advice on self-management, she's discharged. But I want to ask you whether that is a missed opportunity. You might have done lots of things around your input with Mrs. A. Yesterday, I was very struck with the speakers who were talking about health inequalities. And you may well have factored all of that into your self-management plan. But what were the things that you could have done, but perhaps didn't? So did you consider frailty or pre-frailty? She's 65. That is definitely something you need to think about. Did you consider falls? Did you consider sarcopenia? If the answer is no to all of those, it absolutely is a missed opportunity. And I want to use this opportunity of speaking to you for you to go back to your workplaces on Monday and actually put something practical into place that you can do with your patients to consider falls, frailty, and sarcopenia. So the first thing to say is that the World Falls Guidelines came out in 2022. I'm not going to go over the entire World Falls Guidelines, not in the time I have available, but what I really did want to highlight is that opportunistic case finding is a key thing. If you don't ask if the person has fallen, then they're unlikely to tell you, because people are reluctant to report falls. That's been shown in a lot of different research. But if I ask you, how many of you had a fall in the past year? How many of you would actually say yes? I'm putting myself up in that category. Now, was my fall due to overwhelming extrinsic factors? I like to think so. I like to tell myself that, certainly. And if I was asked that question, I would say, yes, but I was on holiday in Bruges, and I had some shoes on that had no grip at all, and it was slightly wet, and there was a very granite pavement, and down I went, admittedly, twice in one night. And that was before I'd had anything to drink, just in case you're thinking that. So I had a fall. I thought I had 2 falls. What you don't know is how I got to Bruges. I got to Bruges by cycling from Amsterdam. So you don't really think that I'm a frailer, older adult, but I had a fall. But other patients, other people you're seeing may well have intrinsic factors that you may need to consider. So you need to ask somebody if they've had a fall in the past year, but then be very sensible about what they tell you about why they fell. The key questions may become later. Are they afraid of falling? Is falling something that concerns them? The answer for me would be most definitely no. It doesn't bother me at all in the slightest, because I know that my balance and everything is quite good. But you also need to ask if they feel unsteady, whether they're standing or moving around. And that really should be 3 questions that you ask every person in front of you over 60 or 65, so that you know whether they need further investigation. And so if they do answer yes to any of those, that should be a trigger for further falls investigations, whether that be within physiotherapy or whether you refer on to another more specialised service for something like a comprehensive geriatric assessment. And then we need to think about frailty. So those of you who work in frailty will have seen this diagram multiple times, no doubt. And often we think that the trigger for coming into that cycle of frailty is disease, and often it is. Now, Mrs. A does have early OA. Perhaps that is a trigger for her frailty. But then we have aging on top of that, and she is 65. We've maybe, in our assessment, tested her strength and power. You would do that for a knee assessment as standard, so you know where her strength and power is. And then you really begin to think about different things. But have you actually looked at her walking speed in any specific detail? You might have noted that her gait analysis, that she looked like she was walking slowly, but did you actually measure her walking speed? Because all of those might help you to look to see whether somebody is actually living with sarcopenia as well. But anybody that knows me knows that I like measuring things. But it's based on the evidence. I do, in essence, what I'm told to do. So 10 years ago now, and it sort of is a bit of a surprise to me that it was 10 years ago now, the British Geriatric Society brought out a document called Fit for Frailty. And it was one of the first documents that really spoke about what you should do to identify if the individual has frailty. So they had a very key, clear statement. Any interaction with an older person by any health or social care professional should include an assessment which identifies if the person has frailty. So in all of those services I showed you at the start, were they identifying if the person was frail? And the answer, probably 10 years ago, was no. The answer, hopefully now, is yes. But in some instances, the answer might be, well, no, not really, because we're not an older person's service. But I want every person to think about frailty. So how do you do that? So one simple way is the clinical frailty scale. You can find it online, and there's also a really good training, very short training module that you can access online as well about how to use the clinical frailty scale, because there has some nuances about how you use it. You don't just sort of eyeball it. You have to go into a little bit more depth. But every individual going through a service, it's really useful to identify how frail they are on the clinical frailty scale. Where I work in NHS Fife, we have online notes, and we're developing a form that you fill out that identifies the level of frailty at the start of every healthcare interaction. And by that I mean an entry to a service rather than each time you might see somebody. And what I'd really like to see is the services that are not within the older person's bundle of services starting to enter that information as well. So when they do present to the front door of the hospital, you can see whether that's a significant change to their previous level. I feel like going Chris Whitty. Next slide. There we go. The next thing you need to ask is whether you assess for sarcopenia. Now, this is an infographic taken from the European Consensus document for sarcopenia. And if you want to know more, as with everything, I would direct you to that. But you'll see there's some fairly simple things that you can do to identify whether somebody has sarcopenia. Starting with a questionnaire, the SARC-F, and then going down to some very simple tests. And the one thing that I highlight to every physiotherapist I come across, or every student I come across, is that most of those are tasks that you would do within physiotherapy. Gait speed, grip strength, chair stand test. They're all physical tests that we at physiotherapists should be doing. And are we not driving forwards that good practice? And if not, why not? One of my biggest bugbears is with the students that I have on placement with me, and they'll put down a problem as low strength, and then they'll look at me and go, you want me to put sarcopenia, don't you? And I went, yes. Let's start using it as the correct phrase. So if you look at what you need to assess, there's a lovely little sort of Venn diagram, and if you look at the evidence or the guidelines for sarcopenia, and you look at the guidelines for frailty, sitting in the middle is grip strength and gait speed. So, you know, that is something that we should be doing. And just to briefly go over what you need to be looking at, for grip strength, the European consensus has 2 points, 16 kilograms for a female, 27 kilograms for a male. The picture shows the sort of hand grip dynamometer that we use in practice. Yes, it's not as good as a Jamar, but I think it's a tenth of the cost, or even less than that. So if it gives us a broad idea of somebody's grip strength, then that's really good. And we have, you know, a grip strength dynamometer in any one of our grab bags that we take out on home visits. There's one on every ward for the physio department, certainly within our older person service. And I was going to say a couple of years ago now, but I'm thinking, no, it's probably 4 years ago, because I know we presented it at one of the online CSP conferences. We did look at grip strength across every service in the whole of Fife. And actually, it mirrored exactly what you would think, that the people in services where you would expect to see a lot of frailty had a lower grip strength, and in those where they might be a little bit fitter, from acute to the community-based hospitals, to a community service, to where I work in an assessment and rehab centre, you could actually see the average grip strengths going up, but still being under those cut points for sarcopenia. Looking at gait speed now, everything that comes out is 0.8 metres per second, more or less, whether it's frailty, whether it's sarcopenia, whether it's anything like that. And gait speed is so easy to measure. I don't know why everybody doesn't do it, because all you need is a stopwatch in your pocket. Now, again, we're very, I say lucky, but we were having new lino put down 10 years ago. You're thinking, Janet, where are you going with this new lino put down? But anybody that measures gait speed knows that you put little bits of zinc oxide tape on the floor, and that's your measure. And I said to the man putting down the lino, how wide are those strips? 2 metres, he said. Okay. And you're putting joining strips in between. Do you have any that are different coloured? Oh, yes, I've got dark black ones I could put in. So our lino now has the distance that we need to do both our timed up and goes, actually, and our gait speed embedded. Cleaners love it. They don't have to be taking stuff off the floor. Now, I'm not suggesting you need new lino, but what I am suggesting is that you make sure you have somewhere where you have the space to measure a gait speed. What if you work in the community, I hear you say? I had to work in the community over COVID when our department was shut, and I managed to find 4 metres to do a gait speed in every one bar one house I was in. Yes, I had to move furniture. Yes, I had to move things slightly out of the way. In one instance, I had to walk somebody out of their front door and into the flat foyer, but I managed it. So yes, you can do that. And then finally, the chair stand test. If you were in the tipples and wrinkles yesterday, I note there's a lovely video gone online now about us all doing a chair stand test, a 30-second sit to stand, whereas we do the 5 times sit to stand, because that's the cut point in the sarcopenia guidance, and anything under 15 seconds. I did have this vague thought about making you all do it, then I realised with the tip-up seats that would be an absolute disaster, so you're not going to do it. So let's go back to Mrs. A. This time, you do a timed walking test. She's been in the waiting room, you walk her through to the physio department. It hasn't taken any extra time, you've got the lines on the floor, you've told her you're going to do it, so you've given her all the information, but actually you've done it as she's walking into the department. You check her grip strength, and you do a 5 times sit to stand. And you ask the 3 screening questions for falls. So I reckon that would probably take less than 2 minutes to add to your consultation. But those 2 minutes that you've added in have given you so much more information. So you discover that she does have an issue with her gait speed. It's actually 0.8, so teetering on the brink. That's why it's in amber. She has a grip strength of 14. That's not great. A sit to stand time isn't great either. And you go, well, that's okay. She's got a sore knee. But then you mirror that, you match that with her grip strength, and you go, actually, there's no reason why she should have a lower grip strength. She hasn't fallen, but she does admit to being a little bit unsteady, and it does make her fearful of falling. So all of a sudden, you have far more information than just about her knee. And that's what older people's physios do all the time. We get a holistic picture, as I'm sure every physio in this room does, but perhaps you haven't gathered the information on the frailty, the falls, or the sarcopenia. So if you look at the Rockwood scale, we'd have to ask a few more questions, but she's probably sitting maybe at a 3, possibly a 4. So she is heading into that pre-frail or frailty level. And then you go, okay, Janet, so what should I do? Now, this is what I really like about this session, and I said this earlier to the people sitting over there. I don't really need to tell you about this, because they're just about to tell you about better exercise prescription for older people. So I had lots that I was going to say at this point, and then when I discovered that I'm the warm-up act for BPOP, I went, I don't need to tell you that. But it is really quite, I mean, it's basic. You know, if people have fallen, then you need to do strength and balance training. If they have sarcopenia, you need to think about, from our perspective, strength training, but obviously nutrition is really important as well. If somebody has slow gait, you want to add in some gait re-education training. For a low energy level, which is one of the key issues in frailty as well, you need to think about pacing and things like that. And then for a functional decline, really important to do task-specific training. And that can be things like backward chaining, getting people down to the ground and back up again, because if people have fallen, that's one of the key things that they want to be able to do. It doesn't really like my next slide, does it? But what I want to finish up with, really, is to remind you that this is actually something that we should be doing with all the people that we interact with. So the physical activity guidelines are for adults and older adults. Yes, that's if you're 16, no, 18 probably, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, up to 100. They are the same guidelines. We all sort of know about our 150 minutes, don't we? Our 30 minutes 5 times a week. But what they've really brought to the forefront with the infographic that was produced now, I think in 2019 or something like that, it came out, is they've put the words build strength in red in the middle. Now, we all know this as physiotherapists, or we should do. But how many of you have done strength training in the past week? And if you did you do it the recommended times? I was found, this is where I get my halo polished, in the hotel gym yesterday, in between conference and the evening reception, doing my strength training. Because normally I go to the gym on a Friday, and it was a Friday. It also adds in information about balance, which obviously is really key for older people. And in the sort of orangey coloured box, it's minimising sedentary time. So it's important as you age, that's one of the really key things you want to do, move more. And you can build that in little sort of moments of exercise snacking, particularly as you age towards your 80s or 90s. You're not going to do half an hour of exercise at a time, but 5 or 10 minutes added up is what really makes the difference. And that makes the difference to Mrs. A, because by following these sort of guidelines, then hopefully we would improve her strength, we'd improve her balance. She comes back to the department, she's done the exercises for her knee, that's great, but she's also taken herself back off that, what I call a cliff edge of frailty. There's a lovely slide from Dr. Clegg that sort of shows that cliff edge of frailty, but she's taken a step back. So maybe over the next few years, she remains fitter, better able to cope, and that's the key of what we need to do for preventative care as you age. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Janet, and you put me to shame.
Oh, no,
I didn't know there
you
was
put me to shame with your exercise.
You have summarised just how important it is for us to prepare for the future, for our older generation. That was an amazing talk. You summarised that so succinctly that and I think you identified 2 minutes, we can make a difference in how we assess older people. And as an old person, and I don't mind using the term old because I'm age proud, I'm 70 and I'm fit and I'm healthy, but the majority of our population isn't. And we have to take the baton. And we have to start with our practice. We are change makers. And Janice has outlined just very simply how we can implement that. Now, grip strength, falls, strengthening, and I'm guilty. I don't do enough strengthening. And you recognise the challenge of sarcopenia as you age. It's a natural. It's going to happen. But, you know, what we can do is start early. I'm going to hand over to you because I'm sure you've got lots of questions for Janet, and I'm sure she will respond appropriately. So thank you very much. And there's a question there already.
I really enjoyed that talk, actually, and got a lot. So I'm Ben, I'm a physio, I'm an ACP on a community ward at the moment. And I'd just like to feel it's a good platform because I was a community physio working with mainly older adults. And they'd come with me to lots of different kind of questions, and I thought with more experience, I really wanted to kind of expand my knowledge, expand what I was able to offer to the patients. So, I mean, anyone in the audience thinking about advanced practice, I think is a really amazing in this remit, because often patients come in with a bad knee, or you get that referral, and they will say, you know, I've got some other problem, and I think as physios are in a fantastic place to address these. But I won't keep talking about advanced clinical practice, but I think it's a really good role that we can play within older adults. The other thing I was going to say is, I also find in this role I do a lot of advanced care planning, and as a physio, I didn't really do that before I did advanced practice, but we have such a good amount of time with patients, and I think it's really, really key, and you build that relationship to start talking about, you know, the patient's wishes. If they were to lose their mobility, you know, what their options would be, whether they would want to go to hospital, and I think that's an amazing time, because obviously patients may lose that ability to express that. And then finally, I just... one of the things I find difficult at the moment locally is that in terms of access to kind of ongoing rehabilitation, really. So on the rehab ward, it used to be community, in the rehab ward would do the rehab, and then, but now the ward is mainly subacute care, where there is physio, but they're not very well. And then they say, well, in the community you get the rehab, but I know from that, it's not that, there's not lots of intensive kind of physio. So yeah, in current demands, I'd just be interested to kind of hear what your thoughts, because rising population and physio is so important, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really do feel that prevention, as they say, is better than cure. And I often think, and I sort of said this as when I was chair of Agile, and now within IPTOP, which is an international organisation, we are physios that work with older people. But actually what we need to do, and that's what I was aiming to do today, is get our message out to physios who don't think that they work with older people, even though they do. And to think that holistic way. So where I work in an assessment and rehab centre, I'm very lucky. I don't have any sort of constraints about the time I can spend with the patients, as in length of time, rather than the actual appointment time. And we do a comprehensive geriatric assessment with our advanced clinical practitioners, GP fellows, OTs, nurses. ourselves as physios. We have access to social work, chaplaincy, the works. And that's really important because you have to recognise the multimodal domains that impact on an older person. And that can be a lot of social issues. It can be a lot of environmental issues as well. And it's really important that that is recognised even if you're not sitting in a setting where you're doing a CGA, a comprehensive geriatric assessment. But we really should be working with older people from when they're 20s, 30s, 40s. It's a huge public health message, of course, as well. And, you know, that is something that we really should be promoting as physiotherapists. And we do have to practice what we preach as well.
Thank you, Janet. Any more questions? Right, I think our time is probably up, so we'll have to stop there. Thank you very much.